dive in. So yeah, we're here to talk about that eternal decision whether we should build or buy a given tool. So before we get into all of this, I'll introduce myself and give you some background on myself. My name is John Laban. I'm CEO and co-founder of OpsLevel. My co-founder Ken Rose and I, we started OpsLevel back in 2018, and it was actually when we noticed a number of big tech companies actually building internal developer tooling, and it all looked the same. And I'll get to that more in my talk. But as a founder of a developer tooling company myself, I am a little biased here, so you'll need to take that with a grain of salt. But I do try to back things up throughout this with examples and data, and so I'm hoping you'll find things in this compelling. So prior to OpsLevel, I worked at PagerDuty for 7 years, where I was their first employee, and I saw a lot of their growth as a new category in this new type of developer tooling out there. And prior to that, I worked at Amazon for a number of years as well, and that'll come into play later in this talk as well. So today we're gonna be covering a lot of common reasons why people decide to build internal developer tooling instead of buying an off-the-shelf solution, and some of the most common things that they actually overlook when making those decisions. So we'll cover a lot of the hidden costs of building, but we'll speak to when it does make sense to build instead of buy. First, let's take a quick look, though, overall at the overall developer tooling landscape out there. There are a ton of developer tooling companies out there today. This is just a very small slice of it. Crunchbase actually shows that there are more than 1,300 developer tooling companies that have more than 1 million in revenue. So if you look at the ones that are actually legit making money, there's already like 1,300 of those companies out there today. 35 of those companies, these developer tooling companies, have actually gone public, and PagerDuty was actually one of those earlier ones that went public, and I was privileged enough to actually see that happen. But hundreds of these developer tooling companies are raising funds every year, and there's been already 30 billion in funds raised so far, and the pace of the fundraising has been seriously accelerating over the last decade. So all of this to say, if you need a developer tool to solve a specific problem, there's a pretty good chance that someone out there has already built like a whole company to sell you that tool. There's a pretty good chance of that. But why has the pace been accelerating over developer tooling? A big part of it has been the spread of cloud computing. The cloud computing has made certain things easier, but in turn, it's created like way more problems to be solved at the same time. But at the same time, the cloud has also made it way easier for vendors to actually start up and provide solutions to those problems. So, the cloud has been the cause of and the solution to all of life's problems now for the last decade. But even with this glut of choice around developer tooling, why do companies still seem to spend time and energy on building tooling instead of like buying solutions, right? So let's talk through some, set of common rationales around building developer tooling internally. And you might have heard or felt a lot of these before as well. By the way, by the end of this, we're hoping to provide you with some of the tools for understanding like how to talk through the decision, especially if you're trying to make a proposal around buying versus building or building versus buying. So, but let's talk about like the common justifications for building developer tooling internally. The first and one of the most common justifications is that we're unique. We're not like the other companies. We have problems that are unique to us, and we haven't found a solution that covers our very unique requirements. Now, I've definitely fallen into this fallacy myself before. I've even built up my own distributed database in the past. I won't get into that now, but I went through that wormhole. The reality is, though, we don't want to admit it, but we often overestimate how unique our problems actually are. Like, say you work in a tech company and you're scaling up your engineering team, you're probably facing some challenges that are pretty hard and challenges that you've never dealt with before personally. But even then, there are literally thousands of other companies that are experiencing the very same scaling challenges as they grow their engineering teams. So you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. It is actually a fairly common challenges that you're facing, even if they're unique to yourself. So in the end, don't let the fun of building something new cloud your judgment. But some good approaches here is to remember, first of all, that buying something doesn't mean that it has to be like rigid and inflexible, right? You can buy extensible products too. So, do look for a platform, something that you can add on to, that you can customize, that has like flexible APIs, and not something that's just a point solution. And another thing to look out for to help mitigate this is to look for a vendor when you're buying stuff that can partner with you. As they build new features. Look for a vendor that asks for your input, like during their product discovery process. And it helps you shape the products that you buy and not just the ones you build. If you can find vendors like that will partner with you as they build. So let's talk through another common justification for building over buying. Another one is a very common one is to try to avoid vendor lock-in. I don't want to be held hostage by my data, right? But the reality is, and this is kind of interesting, you can get just as locked into a tool that you build yourself. As what we're going to see later in this talk, building your own solution for a tool can actually cost easily hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of TCO. And there's actually a very good chance that this will make your leadership team or some of the people making decisions around this more likely to try to keep it around. Like if you've already built it out, they'll want to keep it around rather than find a better solution. Like sunk cost fallacy is a very real thing. And there's a ton of studies out there that actually show it has like a very profound effect on human behavior. And, you have to really realize that even every investment that you make, even when you're building things, it's very much a commitment, and it's something that you will be some degree of locked into. But one approach to help mitigate this is, luckily, a lot of modern vendors, they often let you own your data. They let you actually own it. So look for solutions that have integrations with your data warehouse, or otherwise make it easy to export all your data so that you can continue to like actually, have full ownership over it, and it makes it easier to port to other solutions in the future. Another common justification for building over buying is that it's hard. There's a lot of legal and procurement and security processes that just seem like, okay, this is going to be way too much trouble. But the reality is, it is a muscle that you build over time, and it does take some exercising that muscle, especially at companies that are new to you or you haven't gone through this. So one approach is to actually leverage your in-house experts for guidance. Maybe your boss who's been through this before, or even people in your procurement department. There's a ton of information out there, more than ever before, in terms of how to guide you through this. And I would use it as a chance to grow your skill set, because it is like knowing how to buy good tooling at your company is definitely a valuable skill, and one that you will use again. Finally, I would say the most common justification for building over buying is that it's expensive, right? It's just simply expensive. And there can be some sticker shock when you see pricing, right? But the reality is that it can be far less expensive to buy tooling rather than build it. So let's dive into this one a little bit more. I've got some examples here. So let's unpack all the costs when you actually want to build something. There's all sorts of costs when you think of the TCO, or the total cost of ownership. There's infrastructure costs. Of course, these can vary depending on what you're building. There's all of the engineering time needed to both stand up the tool, as well as the ongoing engineering time to maintain and upgrade the tool. Like when you're building something up. For this, like, you have to realize, and you do, engineers aren't free, right? They're actually extremely expensive and a very limited resource at basically any company out there. So you really have to understand the value of your time and your engineer's time. And finally, one that needs to be mentioned is, and it's often not talked about too much, is opportunity cost. So, the thinking behind this is that building developer tooling isn't necessarily your company's core competency. It isn't your competitive advantage unless you're literally a developer tooling company. And so if you build this thing, what are you not doing that could really be moving the needle for your company? And this is where a lot of like hidden costs might lie, and it's really hard to put a dollar value to this. But the opportunity costs of not having your talented engineers working on other initiatives could be actually quite massive. So, these TCO, these total costs, this ownership costs, they can really vary depending on what kind of tool that you're evaluating. If you're thinking about implementing your own logging solution, like maybe you're thinking of setting up an Elk stack versus buying something like Sumo Logic or Datadog, well, then a lot of the costs might be around infrastructure, ongoing maintenance, upgrades, that sort of thing. Or if you're looking to roll out your own infra platform, like you're going to build out your Kubernetes clusters versus using like a managed solution, then it might be more on the ongoing maintenance upgrade side. Or if it's something a little more on the focus on actually building software side, like alerting and incident management, say you instead of rolling out PagerDuty, you wanted to DIY your own alerting and incident management system with some of the open source like options out there, it usually falls a lot more on the engineering time and skills and opportunity cost side of things. Even when I worked at PagerDuty, especially in the very early days, we would often get faced with the objection around like, I could just build this. It doesn't seem too complicated. Maybe I should just build this myself instead of paying for it. But, number one, it actually was fairly complicated. And a lot of the work that went into it was around making sure that we had, really good redundancy and a lot of, especially dealing with the telephony and making sure that we had lots of different providers for every carrier, for every region across the globe. And so there's a lot of work that went into that, and actually decoupling it from your own internal systems was actually quite valuable for PagerDuty as well. And so around the availability, that was also another big factor in this. And so, in these kinds of tooling, it falls more into the engineering time and skills where the actual costs lie. But I have an actual specific example here with actual costs. If you think about logging, it's standing up your own Elk stack or something is a very tried and true and well understood project. There's playbooks for how to build that, and they're pretty well defined. But there's still actually a ton of work to do and a lot of questions to answer. There's usually questions to answer around the infrastructure costs, the development and customization of the solution, the operating it, and then supporting it, right? And so Mesmo, they published a white paper breaking down some of the example costs of an Elk stack. And of course, Mesmo also super biased here, but it was actually a pretty reasonable breakdown, and the cost they've shown how it can quickly grow to be quite large. Here's a table that breaks down some of the data in Mesmo's case study on build versus buy, but you can see that building does really add up and get expensive. But the one thing that they were missing, in my opinion, was the opportunity cost. What could this company, this mythical company that's building their Elk stack, what could they have been doing instead of setting up an Elk stack? They probably didn't include it, as it's really hard to estimate what that opportunity cost could have been, but it could be actually it could outshadow this potentially. Now, logging, the Elk stack, all that, it's pretty well defined, but there's other areas, other types of tools outside of logging where the playbooks are less defined, right? And when the playbooks aren't as well defined, it can really drive up the eng cost, the people cost quite a bit. So, but okay, let's take a step back. We've shown some of the examples of what it can cost to build things, but we've also talked through some of the common justifications around and fallacies, I guess you could say, around building developer tooling. But there are definitely some situations where you should build your own developer tooling instead of buying it. So let's talk about that. When should you build your own developer tools? Some good reasons to build. One good reason to build your own dev tooling is if you actually are unique, So as an example, I worked at Amazon. It's got to be 15 years ago. And back then, and likely still today, Amazon was running one of the largest software architectures on the planet. And they were pushing the boundaries of what's been done like anywhere else at the time. So it's not surprising that they did have to build a lot of their own tooling internally to support the kind of unique development that they were doing there. But, if you're thinking about this, you got to be brutally honest in assessing yourself here. There are very few companies like that are operating in such a way that it is completely unique, and that they're pushing the boundaries of what exists out there today. So, do be honest there when you're assessing that. Another good reason to build your own dev tooling is when that it relates to something core to your business, or it provides you a competitive edge in doing so. Like where building out some of that tooling will form like a differentiated part of your product experience, like maybe it makes your product faster, better, or whatever. Or if you have like really, really high non-functional expectations, like you work in certain verticals around healthcare or defense, or whatever. So, one example, it's not exactly developer tooling, but Uber, they were using Zendesk for support, but at one point they actually switched off and built their own custom solution internally. So, their Uber scale is massive, of course, and they get a huge number of support inquiries. But the other factor was like the interactions that you have with Uber are also fairly unique. You're on your phone, and whenever something goes wrong, it's usually very time sensitive, very urgent, like has to do with like whether it's traffic incidents or rider safety or whatever. So creating a custom support experience makes sense for them, and actually like can be a competitive edge and differentiate their solution. And so this isn't exactly developer tooling, it's support tooling, but it's a similar principle where it does make sense to build something unique. Another final reason to build your own developer tooling is when there just aren't any obvious solutions out there, where you have a clear problem and you need to solve it, and you couldn't find anybody to solve the problem. So that does happen at times, and it's actually, it is what led to us founding OpsLevel back in 2018. And, in 2018, we saw that microservices architectures that had grown to become the de facto way that engineering teams scale themselves. But it was creating a lot of problems with ownership and problems with governance. And there were a lot of factors just like slowing everybody down at many, many companies out there. And at the time, there really wasn't anything on the market. And we saw lots of people struggling with the problem of ownership. They would start by using spreadsheets and wiki pages, or eventually they'd bite the bullet and build their own homegrown internal tooling. And we saw, lots of examples of companies doing that and spending a lot of money and time, building their own internal tooling to solve the same problems. So, that's why we ended up creating OpsLevel and bringing something to market. But even now, like fast forwarding to today, with OpsLevel's developer portal, there is still the opportunity to build versus buy. So we can talk through that a little bit more as well. There are some great open source starting points out there now to build your own solution if it's something that you want to do. Spotify, they ended up open sourcing their internal developer portal, and they named it Backstage. And likewise, Lyft open sourced theirs, and they named it Clutch. So these are great starting points. But while something like Backstage is a great starting point for building your own developer portal, you do have to understand that it's still very much a platform for building developer portals, right? You still have to build it. And the engineering costs are really where things can get high here. And so, while you'll be able to customize it for your needs, you will have to customize it. I've seen most case studies of implementing Backstage. They do mention at least 6 or more months of your platform engineering team's time taken to roll it out, sometimes even stretching to 12 to 18 months. So, at OpsLevel, our rollouts are quick, and we've got auto discovery of all of your microservices and systems and dedicated support. And while, we'll get you up and running quite quickly, you might not be able to customize it as much to your needs because you're not literally building it yourself, but we do offer a flexible, extensible platform, and of course we host and maintain it and everything, and we upgrade it for you automatically, and you'll have new features coming out every week. So there is even like with OpsLevel itself, there is very much that decision and to be made around build versus buy. But let's let's wrap up. If you're looking to build your own internal developer tooling, it's important to scrutinize the actual justifications for building. We've talked through some of those, and it's important to understand why you want to build and if it makes sense, and to actually compare the cost of buying to the total cost of ownership of building, because that could be quite large, and you have to look at all the factors around building. And then finally, do build tooling, but only only if it's the only solution. If you don't have like a good clean option in front of you. All right. Well, that was our talk. So I'm happy to take any questions that might have come up during the talk.
Yeah, John, I do have one question that came through that I'll pitch to you here live. It's kind of related to a bunch of points you hit, but the idea of sticker shock and comparing that to open source tools, which so like a procurement person or a finance person, they just see open source as free. So how would you advise somebody to kind of build that case internally, or like lead a non-technical stakeholder through that educational journey?
Yeah, I think it just goes back to the concept of total cost of ownership and being able to go through the calculation and like create that basically calculator for like how much it's going to cost for us, and detailing like the people costs. You can ignore the opportunity cost because it's really like it's a fuzzy thing, but for procurement people, you can maybe like be very clear in terms of what it would cost internally to build this, and going through all those line items, especially on the engineering side, and being honest how engineers aren't free and how it's going to be very expensive to build it. So like actually being able to detail it and be fairly honest and detailed with that breakdown.
Makes sense. And this is just one more for me. Maybe you'll share anything that you and Ken gleaned from that discovery phase where you saw many companies building the same internal tooling. Were folks excited by that, or was it like they had to do it because they had to do it?
It's fun to build tools. I mean, that's the other side of it that we didn't really get into. Like it can be fun. Like we're all engineers, right? And we like building things. That's why we kind of got into this, right? And so like that's it can be initially like exciting and fun to like, hey, I want to solve this. This is a problem I see. I want to solve it. I want to build it. It's usually later though, when you get really, really deep into it. Some of those, like some of the people that had created some of these solutions, they found it difficult to like continue to add. They saw all these things that they wanted to add in terms of features to it, and they were feeling somewhat bogged down by it, and finding that they're going to have to dedicate a lot of time year over year into it. And so there was the difference between that initial excitement around building it versus like that ongoing like maintenance and upgrades and new feature sets as the time went on, like that separation there. But yeah, I mean, it's there is that innate like desire to build things. It can be like the other upside of building sometimes is that it can be a good draw for engineering hiring, where it's like, hey, look at this cool like internal tool set that we've built. But yeah, you have to. It can switch quickly from being, something that draws engineers in and is interesting to work on and build, to something that is like a burden, and actually could hurt in terms of attrition. So like you have to really be careful of not switching between those two.
Terrific. Okay, I think that that covers our questions. So we can wrap up there.
Sorry, Andrew, I lost audio there for a second.
All right, can you hear me now, John? No worries. I think we're all set. Thanks everyone for joining us. And okay. as we stated up top, we'll share the recording with all those that have attended and registered. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks so much.
Thanks everybody.
Bye y'all.